Hi, my name's Ali Ferreira. I run the support groups here for SHARE. We're going to show you a little bit of what a support group looks like today by running through our agenda for the September group and talking about the topics that we would have then. We'd love for you to join us in person. Our next group will be October 21st, Saturday at 10 o'clock. We typically run from 10 o'clock to 11:30, and our topic next month will be healing and coping in the day-to-day after loss. So our topic for September is pregnancy and parenting after loss. This can be a great topic to talk about whether you are currently parenting a child, whether you are currently pregnant, or whether you think in the future you may parent a living child. So great thing to listen to even if it's not where you are right now. As a trigger warning, we will be talking about living children and pregnancy, as well as, of course, pregnancy and infant loss. So if that's something you feel would be too much for you at this point, it might not be the right video for you to watch. Feel free to let us know if you need more information. So the way we always start the group is with an introduction. So I'm going to start there. Again, my name is Ali Ferreira. I had a loss in 2017. My daughter, her name is Miriam Jordan Ferreira, we call her Mira for short, was diagnosed when I was 12 weeks pregnant with hydrocephalus, and at 18 weeks pregnant, after getting lots of testing and meeting with some amazing doctors, it unfortunately was confirmed that her condition went through her entire body. Her condition doesn't have a name. It was really the first time that they had seen this, but it impacted every organ she had. She was perfectly safe and comfortable in my womb, but it was known that she could not survive after birth. My husband and I easily and confidently made the decision to carry her to term. We felt that's very much what was best for her and best for us. We very much support any family that does choose to terminate for medical reasons, but for us, that wasn't the choice we wanted. So we carried Mira to term. We focused as much as we could during the pregnancy on finding joy in her life at this time, showing her some amazing things, and of course there was a lot of doctor's appointments and grief involved as well, but that time with her was wonderful. She was born on December 18th, 2017. She lived for 53 minutes. That whole time she was either in her father's or my arms. We had the wonderful experience to be able to baptize her in the OR where I had the C-section and be able to spend her whole life with her. And then as I recovered in the hospital from the C-section, she stayed with us and we made lots of memories and footprints and canvases and had a team to help us with that. So that was over 5 years ago at this point. So that's kind of what brings me to this group is I really want to be able to meet with other lost parents. I'm still healing. This is a lifelong journey, so it's helpful for me, but I also like to meet other people wherever they are in their journey, and hopefully we can be part of that healing process as well. Angie, would you like to share a little bit about you? Give a chance for other group members.
Sure. My name is Angie Chelton. I am a therapist. I specialize in perinatal mental health and grief and loss and trauma. I'm also a board member of SHARE, and most importantly, I am the mom of 2 babies who were lost during pregnancy. My first baby, Callan, was born during my 8th week of pregnancy, and my son, Andrew, was born in my late 2nd trimester. These losses were 2004 and 2005, so it's been a long journey for me. And I continue to work with families who have experienced this loss because I understand what this journey is like and how important it is and how important our kids are. So I like being involved with caring for those who are newer in this journey.
And then this is often a time in our group where we invite everyone to share how much or how little of their story they're comfortable, or none at all if they're not ready. And tears and laughter and joy and grief are all welcome in our group. So it's a time for us to do that. And then at this point, we are going to focus on our topic today of pregnancy and parenting after loss. So where I want to start is the part that we often first think about in anything that is tied with the words after loss, and that's the triggers, the fears, and the grief. And for those of you watching by video, I do have a handout that we have for each group, and we will post that for you to be able to have access to as well. So I want to start by talking about some common triggers in pregnancy. So if anyone here is thinking about becoming pregnant, is pregnant after loss, or had at some point been pregnant after loss, there's a lot of triggers that come with that, and it helps to be prepared. It also helps to know that some of your triggers may not have been so crazy. I think sometimes we're made to feel crazy when we have triggers in pregnancy after loss, but it's actually very normal and healthy. So I just want to talk about some common ones. The first step, trying to conceive. That can be very triggering. So, think if you're very purposeful about this and thinking about the dates in your monthly cycle that it would be best, or if you're the non-birthing partner, thinking about your partner's cycle, especially if natural conception isn't an option for you for any reason, thinking about fertility treatments in your cycle, it's all very triggering. Planning is triggering in general after a loss because you had plans and they didn't go the right way. And then of course that pregnancy test, that comes with so many emotions. So trying to conceive and it's a negative pregnancy test, you might have a little relief. You also probably have a lot of devastation that you have to wait another month at least, and then you start to have fears around that. But also the positive pregnancy test can come with a lot of emotions. Most everyone I've spoken to who has had a pregnancy after loss, including myself, who gets that positive pregnancy test, feels some terror with it. So there's joy, yes, I'm excited I'm pregnant, but there's also a lot of fear because last time you had a positive pregnancy test, it brought a lot of pain along with that joy of the life. So this is very normal. A lot of people have a lot of guilt for that it wasn't simple joy at the positive pregnancy test, but it's normal. Your brain has learned that pregnancy does not always equal a baby, and that's a very hard thing to learn and a lot of innocence lost. Some other things that can be triggering are medical appointments, so going in to hear the heartbeat, things like that, ultrasounds, talking to your doctor. Unfortunately, sometimes being asked over and over again, is this your first pregnancy? How many pregnancies have you had? How many living children do you have? These are all questions that are often asked that can be triggering. The waiting room can be triggering. Often you're in the same practice that you were for your previous pregnancy. That's a lot, to be in the same place and see the same things. Certain gestational ages can be triggering. So knowing that this is how far along I was when I lost my baby, that can be a lot. And along with that, the actual dates on the calendar. So like I know when I was pregnant with my living son, certain dates on the calendar that were associated with my daughter I lost, Mira, it could feel like, oh, something terrible is going to happen today because last time on this date it did. That doesn't make those feelings true, but they do feel very real. Other people's comments can also be a huge trigger. So hearing people say things like, oh, it's your first real baby, or, consistently forgetting that you already had a pregnancy, or saying things like, oh gosh, it's gonna be awful when the baby's born, you're not gonna get any sleep, and things like that. Sometimes they're very innocent comments, but they can be pretty triggering and hurtful, even if they wouldn't be for someone who already had a child, like that was living. Things I know that stuck out to me were commenting on how hard parenting was already really aware how hard parenting was, but I was more acutely aware of how hard grief was. So those comments can be a lot to handle. Milestones in the pregnancy can be triggering for, worries about this pregnancy, but also grief for your last pregnancy. So, if you feel the baby move when you didn't get a chance to feel your other baby move, there's grief that comes with that. It's kind of becoming more acutely aware of things you missed. but it also can be kind of worrisome as you move through your current pregnancy as well. That's also very normal. Finding out gender. This is one that can be very difficult for a lot of people. It's one of those things that's supposed to be pure joy, but when you have lost a baby, it's often a little more complex. There's often this dichotomy of, well, I'll use myself for an example. So I had a daughter that I lost. So there's this part of you, oh my gosh, I want to have that daughter. I pictured these stereotypical girl things like dressing in dresses. I pictured doing things with my daughter that I had liked as a child that are just girly. And so part of you really, really wants that. And then part of you might be like, it would be too hard to have a girl after all this. Yeah, a girl I had didn't survive. You know, maybe a boy would be better and it wouldn't remind me of so much. And gosh, there's this really irrational, I think, part of me that was like, well, maybe girls can't survive for me, but the boys can, which obviously doesn't make any sense, but our fears are not always rational. So finding out the gender can have joy and disappointment. So that's something that is, again, very normal, can bring about guilt, but it doesn't need to. It's okay to feel anything you are. Movement. Again, for the same reasons the milestones, it can bring about some grief for your previous pregnancy. It can also bring about comfort and anxiety. So I feel the baby moving. I know the baby's okay right now, but babies don't move constantly 24/7. So in those breaks from movement sometimes can increase anxiety. And then of course, pregnancy symptoms coming and going can create anxiety and be triggering, as well as hospital stays. So whether you have to be in the hospital a bit during your pregnancy or for labor and delivery, that can be very triggering. I know for me, it led to some flashbacks. Thankfully, I had some support through those. But it would be normal seeing similar things to have your brain activated, to have fears and triggers and grief at that time. So the reason we talk about triggers is not to scare people, it's to help people be aware and create a support system for them. And then I'm just gonna run through some common triggers in parenting as well. And this is in the newborn phase all the way up to, you know, your children are grown and off on their own and beyond. The triggers in parenting happen consistently. Some of these are things that any parent would find triggering, and some might be a little unique to our community. So illness, I think for obvious reasons. It's scary when your kid's sick and you've had a kid that didn't make it before. Breastfeeding can be triggering if it doesn't go exactly as planned and you had wanted to breastfeed. It can also be triggering even if it goes perfectly, because you may not have gotten a chance to breastfeed another child that you had. Again, we already talked about milestones in pregnancy, but your child's milestones can be triggering. As they move through the stages, they bring about great joy, but it also is a renewed reality of milestones you missed with the baby you lost. Lack of sleep. This is a big trigger. A lack of sleep makes everything harder, and the reality is there's often, if not always, lack of sleep when you have children. So it can just make you more susceptible to irritability, frustration, but also sadness and grief, and just having your cup not as full to work through those things. Disagreements with your partner can be triggering. And just in general, things that don't go as planned, it can create guilt. I know for me, I would have some irrational thoughts sometimes. Well, maybe I didn't deserve to be a parent because now I'm fighting with my partner, or I didn't do this quite right for my child. It didn't go as planned. Those thoughts are normal. They are not making you unhealthy, but they are really frustrating and overwhelming. So as valid as they are, keep in mind, they're not true. It is not true that you did not deserve something because something's not going as planned. Perinatal mood disorders are also very real, and lost moms are at a higher risk for them. Leaving the baby either to go back to work or just because you're going on an outing and leaving baby with a sitter can be very triggering as well. as doctor's appointments can be, worried about what they might say, possibly taking your baby to a doctor you had hoped to take your other baby to. So all these things can be kind of triggering in parenting. And I think what all this brings us to is remembering that these triggers are very real, they're very difficult, but they are also very possible to cope with. So these triggers are not reasons to not add to your family, they're just things to be aware of. And that brings us to the much happier topic. There is so much joy in pregnancy and parenting after loss as well. We want to remember another baby's not a replacement, as all of you know. Sometimes you'll have to remind the people around you of that. But because another baby isn't a replacement, that means that the grief doesn't end with another baby either. So adding to your family doesn't end grief, but it really, I have found with many of the families I work with, as well as myself, it does heal a part of you. Just because it brings so much joy. It doesn't make the grief smaller, it adds to your life, and that is healing. So, though we can never put on a child that their job is to heal you, becoming a parent to a living child, or another living child if your loss wasn't your first child, can be a really joyful, beautiful experience, even though it comes with so many triggers. So this is a place where I like to remind people that being excited for another child in your family does not mean that you love the baby you lost any less. It does not mean you're doing anything to hurt your relationship with the child you lost. It does not mean you're doing anything wrong. You can be both fully joyful for another child and fully miss and love the child you lost. That is absolutely possible, expected, and really beautiful that we can hold that much emotion. Something else I like to address here is some terms that are pretty common in the loss community, and these are sunshine babies, rainbow babies, and angel babies. So you'll hear these terms, especially a lot if you do become pregnant after your loss. And what they mean is a sunshine baby is used to refer to living children that were born before you had a loss. Angel babies are the children or babies that were lost in the womb or infancy. And then a rainbow baby is a baby born after loss, with the idea of the symbolism being that the baby came after the storm of grief and was a rainbow of joy. I like to bring this up, not just so you don't hear these words and go, what do they mean if you don't know them, but also to share that if you find joy in these words, awesome, use them. And if you don't find joy in these words, if they make you uncomfortable, don't use them. Personally, I don't like to use these terms. Mira was my first child, so sunshine baby just doesn't even apply to me. I don't love the term angel baby. In my opinion and beliefs, my daughter did not become an angel when she passed. I know that's not necessarily what people are saying when they use these terms, but I just don't like to use it. She's my baby that died, and I'm okay using those terms. If it makes you comfortable to think of your baby as an angel, or we all just sometimes say, oh, they're such an angel, yes, use that word. If it brings you comfort, it's the word for you. And then as for rainbow babies, I would say people are split on this, and that's okay to be. Some people love the symbolism of the rainbow, and yes, use it then. Some people don't, because for them it feels too much like their baby they lost is being looked at as a storm. That's not the idea of it, but personally I felt that way a little bit myself, and it just made me uncomfortable, so we chose not to use it. I also didn't want to define my living child by his sister's loss. He knows about his sister, we talk about her all the time, but I didn't want him to be defined that way, and I was concerned myself with my personality, if we used that term, I would be tempted to define him by the loss, so we chose not to. Lots of people use these terms very successfully and love them, and it's a way that they bring joy into it, so that's very much up to you. And this brings us to what I think is the most important point. In pregnancy and parenting after loss, and life after loss in general, grief and joy live together. So the important thing of this is that you don't have to shove your grief away to feel joy. And you don't have to stop feeling joy to feel that you can healthily and fully grieve your loss. They come together. And this is where I like to embrace the word and instead of but. So many of us say, oh, it's so hard that I lost my baby, but I have another child. Or that was a really hard time in my life, but I have things to be grateful for. And it's kind of like we're trying to convince ourselves. But whenever we say but, we kind of negate what was before it. We say it wasn't as important. And your pain is just as important as your joy. So I like to use and. It was really hard that I lost my daughter, and I loved the time I had with her. It was really hard to experience infant loss, and I am so blessed to have a living child to raise. That and is so important. So and is a big part of joy and grief living together. You can celebrate all your babies. I make sure there's a symbolism whenever we take pictures as a family for me and my husband and son. My daughter is represented there, and my son and husband love that as well. And my husband actually insists on it, so this is an awesome thing too. We love that. It's one way that we celebrate all our babies. We do something to mark my daughter's birthday the same way that we celebrate my son's birthday. Some of these things may be for you, some may not. You can celebrate all your babies in any way that you want, but you don't have to only celebrate your living children. Also, you can honor all your emotions. So again, the and. You can feel sad at an event because your lost baby isn't there, and really happy because the event's fun. I felt extremely joyful at my son's first birthday party. It was so fun to plan a party that I had wanted to for so long. It was so fun to see him happy and get cake all over his face. And it broke my heart I never got to plan a first birthday party for my daughter that she was there for. And it broke my heart my son didn't have his sister there to celebrate. And I loved how much of my family came out to celebrate my son. So all that can live together, and we can honor all those emotions. And I could give you dozens of examples of that, as I'm sure you felt yourself. And lastly, I think it's important to talk about advocating for yourself. So often human emotions are complex, and the people around us may want to simplify them for you and say, no, you should be happy because you're pregnant. No, you should just be grateful for the living children you have. Or, hey, you're grieving wrong. Or your doctors may not fully understand where your emotions are, either at your living child's appointments or at your pregnancy prenatal appointments. And this is where advocacy comes up. You are allowed to speak up for yourself and say, no, I feel happy and sad. My daughter still matters even though my son's here. And you're allowed to tell doctors what you need in your appointments, to have a conversation with them about how they might better meet your needs. And this is all very important and something we're happy to talk about and help you with if you need it. So that's my information today on pregnancy and parenting after loss. I think it's all super important, again, whether or not you plan to have another child or have living children, because the idea of joy and grief being together is applicable to all of us. So this is when we move into sharing together and having an activity. So what I like to do is introduce the activity so we can work on it as we all share together. And today our activity is a symbol of how grief and joy do live together. So it's something you can engage in whether or not pregnancy and parenting after loss apply to you. And we are going to upload the file you would need to do this, so you can do it at home if you would like. All you need is some markers or crayons, or if you want, a pen or whatever. You can do it however you want. So I'll hold up mine as an example. This is a stained glass heart coloring page. So what I've done here is the part that is a heart is filled with kind of the moments that have brought me peace and joy and these aspects of my life that kind of fill me up. And yours might be similar or very different. And then outside and around the heart, I've filled that in with things that have been difficult, triggers, fears, just aspects where grief has shown up. And what I love about the metaphor of this is when you look at it all together, it's really what makes it complete. If we just had the heart, this wouldn't look as nice. But I think all of these colors together, all of these words together make it beautiful. So as hard as it is to have these outside things in my life, it's part of what makes my life complete. So we're gonna work on this together, and as we do that, we can kind of share things that have come up as we've discussed this, or things that have just come up for us in the past month that we want to talk about.
I'll take a page.
Page, awesome. And yes, so this is a blank page, and we'll upload that. Angie, anything from what we talked about today bring up anything for you, or do you have any questions?
Yeah, I really appreciate the "and" because I think that this whole activity is about the "and." There are all of these different things that go on all at the same time, and paying attention and being aware in different circumstances, kind of what comes up for us. Being able to identify, name different emotions, and then really give them space. There's a lot of times where we think we should feel a certain way, or there are things we should do or shouldn't do. And healing is really about kind of acknowledging what is there and making room for it and allowing it to be what it is until it changes, or unless it changes.
And change, I'm so glad you brought that up too, because I think sometimes it can bring about a lot of mixed feelings too when things do change. So if something used to be a trigger and all of a sudden you handled it really well, I know for me that's led to some guilt, like, oh my gosh, am I not missing Mira enough? Am I not acknowledging her enough? No, life just changes. It is okay. And it's okay to have healing change a little bit about how you feel about things.
Yeah, one of the things that I find myself saying a lot recently is the idea that grief will last as long as love does, but it changes. The quality of those of that grief changes and looks a lot more like love over time. You feel that more positive, almost bittersweet instead of painful as time goes on. And there's a lot of people that describe, you know, kind of the mellowing, I think of wine, like of mellowing of the experience over time. Not that it ever goes away, and there are times when it does come back in kind of a strong and intense way, and that's okay too. But it does change in quality, and I think that's hopeful, that the pain that you feel so much at the beginning, it does change over time.
That's such a good point and good metaphors. And important to remember too, beginning is a relative term, right? So like, I think people tend to think, especially people who've never experienced significant grief, like, oh, the beginning of grief is like until the funeral, or like those first few weeks. But really, like, research wise, we talk about the beginning of grief as the first 1 to 2 years. So it's important to remember in the beginning, if this still feels really heavy and you're like, oh, it's been 6 months, it's still heavy, it's never gonna stop. It's not necessarily true.
And there is the experience then of, as you go through life living with that loss, you do go through those anniversaries. Possibly more children do come along, and so there are those experiences. And all of those firsts, especially that first year, holidays, family gatherings, the anniversaries of special events through the pregnancy, all of those kind of bring it back. So it is the beginning.
Yeah, very much. Good. Yeah, and I can think of, I mean, I could give so many examples of ways that I found such beautiful joy in getting to parent my son. But I think too, you know, it took us quite a while to be able to conceive my son and for him to be born, and there was joy that I found before that as well. So, you know, it doesn't have to be that your joy comes from adding to your family. It can come from so many different ways too.
I have in my professional life, I have worked with clients who have really felt drawn to this idea of cultivating a life of fullness and joy that wasn't connected to their reproductive life in any way.
Yeah.
And so it's really beautiful to understand that the fullness of life, just like our mosaic, our reproductive parts are part of it, but it's not the only part.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways that we can seek joy, seek fullness.
Yeah.
And so life after loss doesn't only have to include reproductive, matters.
Yeah, that's great. And it makes me think too, just about how healthy that is for all people, whether they have children or not, but for parents too. You know, we can't completely define ourselves by our children because we're individuals too. And I think that's important for everyone, but it's especially important for lost parents because there are such complex emotions around this. We want to find other things that bring us joy. We want to find meaning in multiple aspects of our life.
Yeah, and there's around the time, like that lifespan where you are, a lot of people are having children, adding to their families, like this thing that they have envisioned that they would do at this certain part of their life. That part of us becomes like very prominent a lot of times. And there might be other parts of us that we kind of neglect. And so it's possible that one of the things that we can do in our healing is to pay attention to other parts of ourselves that might need some nurturing and some care, as so much attention is given to you know, those family building parts of us.
So I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap up our video here to give our group a time to work on their projects and to continue to talk and process about what we talked about today. Again, we often also use this time to talk about subjects completely unrelated to whatever our topic was today. Any sorts of concerns or joys that you have are welcome to be shared during this time. We do have a couple rules that we follow in our group during share time. Specifically, we don't give advice unless it is specifically asked. You of course can ask for advice, but we don't give it unless it's wanted. Confidentiality is expected within our group unless safety is a concern. Then of course we'd have to violate confidentiality. And then lastly, we assume the positive intent of the others in the group. So if someone here says something that's hurtful, we are going to address it as we should for healing, but we're here for each other. So we always assume positive intent. So thank you so much for joining us by video today. We would love to have you here in person for our group. I hope you got a little taste of what it's like to join us. Again, our next group will be October 21st with focusing on healing and coping in the day-to-day after loss. And we meet on Saturday, the third Saturday of the month, at 10 o'clock at the Ephrata Public Library. Thank you so much. Bye.